Are you a woman standing at a crossroads, eager for change? It's time to connect with your authentic and empowered self at Boss Leap. Join Dr. Sylvia Morris and Dr. Angela Walker in this empowering community where real-life stories of courageous and talented women inspire and motivate. Engage in honest conversations that foster well-being, drawing from our own journeys. Let us guide you toward profound growth and transformation in both your personal and professional life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Sylvia Morris and Dr. Angela Walker.
Well, welcome back to Boss Leap. I am here. I am Dr. Sylvia Morris, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Angela Walker. And we are excited to have a conversation today with Lisa Burgos Hernandez. And full disclosure, she is one of our classmates from Georgetown, but we will get to all of that. Mm-hmm. I am thinking about coffee today, and I know that's very strange. However, Lisa Burgos is the reason why I drink Bustelo coffee. And if I'm perfectly honest, I started drinking coffee in medical school, and we would go to a place called It's Your Mug. And that's where I started drinking brevets, which is half and half in espresso. And then now I'm to the point where really I drink probably 3 shots of espresso with a little splash of half and half with no sugar. So I have made a huge transition. Angela, what's your coffee beverage of choice?
I guess just coffee and cream. Honestly, if I'm out somewhere, it's usually a latte or a cappuccino. I've got to have milk in it. Honestly, I'll drink pretty much anything. You are the person that turned me on to brevets. Although right now I'm away from dairy, and I don't think the brevet is, you can do it with the non-dairy. I haven't tried it. It's just not as creamy. But that helped me get away from sugar in my coffee. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. But I go back and forth, but it doesn't really matter. My youngest daughter is a barista, and so she is definitely a coffee snob. So I get talked about when I put in like the Kirkland brand Keurig in my Krups thing in the kitchen, but I just need it fast. I don't have time so don't worry about buying me a whole espresso machine or even the French press. It's great. And when I'm out somewhere, that's what I'd like. But when I wake up in the morning, now I am good enough. I get my water in first, but then I just need a cup of coffee. And as long as I can put some cream in there, I'm going to be good. So, it varies on what I have, but what does not vary is I need a cup of coffee to get started in the morning. So
absolutely. In transparency, I actually have a coffee maker, not quite a Mr. Coffee that I had all throughout medical school, but yeah, I percolate my coffee in the morning and drop my cream in and keep it pushing.
Yeah.
So let's welcome our guests. Welcome, Lisa Burgos Hernandez.
Yay.
Good to see you.
Happy that you are here and that you are going to share your journey, your boss leaps. I can't wait to kind of get into our conversation. And I remember sitting at your mom's table in her kitchen in Miami drinking Bustelo. So that's my first coffee memory. What's yours?
Oh, I would say it's about the same thing, like drinking coffee. It didn't start until probably high school. Actually, I do remember one of my first coffee experiences, which didn't end well during my chemistry exam in high school. But we won't talk about that. We'll talk about the good stuff. And that was doing the same thing, having coffee across the table with my mom and sister. And, other full disclosure is that the table was right in front of a window that you could see out into the neighborhood. So we sat there and talked, but also had that window, the curtains open, so we could see who was passing by. and going, oh yeah, we know him, or who's that? That one's someone's new. So that was part of the whole time together. It was not only sharing each other and having a good cup of coffee, but also like spying on the neighborhood and knowing who was doing what they were supposed to do and not doing what they were supposed to do, that type of thing.
I love it. That's beautiful. I think when you can tie it to memories and yeah.
I'm always good for the tea, and I guess in this instance, the coffee. So you mentioned, Lisa, that you have a sister, and you have actually a twin sister. So tell me what you've learned from having a twin sister.
Well, besides sharing, which is something that you have to do, whether it's sharing your birthday, your room, your time with your parents, your birthday cake. That was
That's
something.
right.
Yeah. So we shared everything. So that was one thing. The other thing was, being, having empathy and being able to listen and to understand someone else's point of view, even when you thought you were right. Because I always think I'm right. And actually I am.
Most often you are right, Lisa.
Yeah. But also really being, an empath and knowing that there are other people's point of view that really matter and that you have to listen and understand and also compromise.
I haven't talked to you in quite a while. And I want to actually ask you something I've been dying to ask about, because I'm just fascinated with, I'm just going to jump right into it, Lisa, with your career path. I am very, very proud of you and all that you've done. And I know that after medical school, you have practiced in the public health arena and you've got your master's in public health. You're currently at the Santa Cruz County as the public health officer, but you were also at Berkeley, the city of Berkeley, at the beginning and height of the pandemic. So just along those lines, being an empath obviously helps to be in medicine. I know you could probably write a book right now, but can you give us some insight to what that was like being at this momentous time in our country's history? I'm sure you learn about pandemics and things of that nature, go in your training, but to actually put all that into play, what was that like?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. One, like we saw it coming. We saw some of it happening. And as you mentioned, Angela, like we were trained and, we did exercises and scenarios and what have you. But it wasn't until you're really in it that you really have to put everything that you learned to practice. So we saw it coming. And especially in Berkeley, we had those conversations. And one of the conversations, to be quite honest, is were we going to be in it for the long haul? Like as a city, so most in California, most of the health departments are in county structures. There's only 3 cities in the state that have a health department and a health officer. Berkeley's one, and then there's 2 in Southern California, and Pasadena and Long Beach. And we, I think, are one of the smallest, but one of the oldest health departments. So it was a conversation about, do we do this as a city, or do we just work with our county sister to do the work and let them do the work and we would support them? So that was one of the conversations we had. And I was pretty honest, because I didn't know how long it would be that we would be responding, but I knew that it was going to take an enormous amount of resources, not only internally, but externally in the community and within the city staff as well. So the answer was yes, we're in it. So we did it. And I was fortunate enough to have support from the city leadership, the mayor, my boss, the city manager. All those things really help. And also not only support, but trust, because we really didn't know what we were dealing with. The other thing that I would say was important was having a network. And we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, in terms of supports that are beyond just the folks that you work with day in and day out, but also your networks, and one of which was what we called the Association of Bay Area Health Officers, or ABAHO. Interesting name, but it really is a group of 13 health jurisdictions in the Bay Area that we've been getting together since the 80s, since the HIV epidemic, and we really met twice a month, and then every other month we had dinner in person, and we ate, and we also, had an agenda. So it wasn't that we were just chatting and socializing, though that was part of it. We also did really have conversations about issues that we were dealing with. So that network and that response helped. But it was a lot of doing stuff and learning and pulling from our experiences, and also just having the trust and the coordination within the city that helped. And it was hard. It was still really hard. So I could talk probably this whole time on the pandemic, but I'll stop there.
Yeah.
If I answered your question, or if you have follow-up questions, I could talk about it.
No.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah.
But let's move back. Public health. Certainly, I have a master's in public health. I know it's the best thing that I've ever done, because it helps me think about communities. And the reason I went into medicine was to help communities. But tell me, how did you come to public health as a career?
We could step back too. I think that's a great way of looking at it. So as Angela mentioned, I, went to medical school with you guys, and decided to do OBGYN, and did a residency in OB and practiced for about 4.5 years. In between there, I had my kids, and I got married. I got married to another classmate. He actually was the year behind me, or behind us. And once we finished our residencies, we moved to New Mexico, and we practiced there. And I was practicing OBGYN, and I enjoyed it. However, I kept having these inner conversations with myself about, like, gosh, why are these women here? In terms of, like, why are they coming with, like, advanced breast cancer? Or I had a young woman who, like, I diagnosed with cervical cancer, like, it was very obvious from her exam that she had cervical cancer. It wasn't even like I had to wait for the results of a pap smear. And I won't get into the details on that, but, we had conversations, she and I said, why didn't you, she actually had moved from the East Coast to New Mexico and had insurance, and she had moved for her job. And I said, why didn't you come in sooner? And it was more that she didn't realize that it was important for her to do screening exams. Then the woman, the elderly lady that I diagnosed with breast cancer, she had didn't have access to care as often as she needed. She actually had to rely on other people to take her to the hospital or to her doctor's offices. And she wasn't unique in that situation, where access was really part of the issue. So I started thinking about, where can I make the biggest difference in the world, or in my world? And I realized after talking to my husband, actually, one of his classmates went into public health, and then had conversations with him, and realized that that's what I wanted to do. So put my career on hold, changed directions, moved to California, did my second residency, and then started working in public health. So that's kind of a snapshot as to, my career, why did I change? And I didn't realize it until later that I was thinking about public health even in med school, because we had a talk at one of our classes where this man came in. I didn't realize who he was, but one of the things he said to us was that our white coats were a sign of, we could use our white coats to advocate for our communities, and how powerful it was to be a physician, and how we could advocate for communities because of the fact that we were a physician. And I didn't realize how important that was and how it applies in my life now and who he was. He was actually the health officer of Washington, D.C. And that was pretty neat and powerful, reflecting on it. And then also he motivated me and another classmate to do some work in the community. And that was really, I didn't realize it until I was getting my MPH and doing my residency that he had planted the seed, and now it was growing.
I've known you since medical school, but not known. And so I have to say, for the audience that doesn't know, for someone to do a residency in OBGYN, which is grueling, because that's what I've done, and then to have the bandwidth, the heart, the fortitude to then go on and do another residency, because I can't imagine doing another one after that, is huge. That's commendable. And I think it's an example of following your heart. And so, yeah, I just have to put that out there, because I don't know that I remember that you did OBGYN and now have gone on to just do amazing things. So that's amazing.
Girl, you're making boss leap moves.
Yes,
always,
that is
always.
a true definition of a boss leap move, is following your heart and doing what you're led to do.
So Lisa, what would you tell the young woman, that would be walking the halls of Georgetown? What would you say to her? What advice would you have for her?
Well, I think that I would say continue with medicine, because it's the foundation for many great things in the future. It's not going to be easy. Well, maybe it will be. So if it is easy, awesome. But from my experience, it was a long, hard journey, and totally worth it. So I would say continue with medicine, and also on your path, build a community. And that's something that I would say I learned kind of late in college, and definitely learned it in med school, but it was hard to realize how important it was, not only for having, study groups and being able to get through exams, but also it's your support. It's your support. You could talk to them and kind of do some gut checks with them and say, what do you think about this? Did you see that? Did you hear that? And it's really important. I remember being in, I think it was neurology. Can't remember which rotation it was. I was the shortest, brownest person there. And that was different for me, and being able to come back and finishing, that rotation or the day's work and coming back and talking to my friends really was helpful, because sometimes you're the only one in that rotation, or in the office or the room or the exam room lecture, and it's important to have that community to come back to.
Yeah, we talk about that in the game plan. The book we wrote is just not taking for granted your community. So not only building a community, but also those people that have gotten you to the point that you are at, for that college student or the med school student, is, still be intentional about the relationships that are meaningful. Don't put them on hold, and don't wait, because investing time in those relationships is going to continue to be beneficial to you. It's helpful as we move along, just to realize we've got to have that community each step of the way. You can't just wait, once I get to this point, once I get to this point, once I get to this point, then I'll take the time for them. Yeah. Very good, Lisa.
So Lisa, we definitely have had some times. I remember in med school where we had the big snowstorm, and there was 17 inches of snow on the streets of Washington, D.C. And you came by and you picked me up maybe 2 blocks from my house in a little Tercel. And no, we didn't go to the library. We probably had finished studying, but we went to Lord and Taylor's to do a little retail therapy. So when you talk about community, I've stayed with you and your husband at various points where I was studying at a place, a far field from my residency. You took me to the airport when I moved to Seattle to go for training. And I remember bursting into tears at the airport because I was so terrified. And I even get emotional just thinking about it. But you have always shown up for me. And so you mentioned having community and having kind of a tribe or a group of people around you. Can you talk a little bit more about how you like people to show up for you? And then certainly you show up for, you are a mother, a sister, a daughter, a wife, you are a friend, you are a public health leader. I'm probably leaving off, you have a pet, Casey. Fashionista, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Shoe model, budding shoe model. But all of those things. So how is it that you like people to show up for you? And then how do you manage all those different hats? Long question, I know.
Yeah. Show up for me, just to be there. And if I call, if you have time, talk to me. And it's usually not, sometimes it's about sharing news, good or bad. But it's also just having a conversation about maybe the shopping spree or trip, or it's about, Sylvia, you travel, I don't. So it's about hearing about your adventures and what you learn and your exposures. And just that is something that's really important to me. And then kind of pushing me. So, you push me and you say, what are you doing for yourself? So having that little reminder, and even in the question that you just asked, it's like, what are you doing for yourself to care for yourself? And I think that's important, but it's more just having that place of familiarity and of comfort and just conversation. That's kind of what I need, someone to listen. So some people like to problem solve for you. I would say I actually do that to my kids, and they're like, I did not call you for you to solve my problem. I called you so that you could hear what's going on and what's happening. Example was my son, who called me about 10 minutes before this taping. And I was like, I wanted to solve his problem, but most times he doesn't want that. And most times I don't want that either. So it's just to be there to listen. And how do you balance things? How do I balance things? It's just, I will say I try most times compartmentalize everything. And, I have a task, I have a to-do list. I still write things down.
Oh, I love pen and paper. Absolutely.
Yeah, I do. I thought I was going to use my iPad to take notes and to organize stuff, but I still have to-do lists that I do for, okay, this is what I need to do for home. This is all the things that I need to do for work. When I have meetings, I do use OneNote for that to kind of organize myself for meetings. So if I'm going to have meetings with, whether it's my boss or my coworkers, I do take notes on that so I can look back. But that's kind of how I need to do it. It's sort of, I compartmentalize and I use lists, and know that sometimes I don't get to cross everything off that list, and it's okay. There's another day.
So can I ask one other question? I know you're a big mani-pedi kind of girl.
Yeah.
So when was the last, I know everything is okay. It's like, oh yeah, I have my mani-pedi, but if you haven't had a mani-pedi, in several weeks, I know it's been busy. So when was your last mani-pedi? The people want to know.
Saturday.
Right. That's awesome.
Saturday. Yeah. And what I try to do is do that now with my daughter. And speaking about balancing things, so this is what happened years ago. So my daughter is in her 20s now. probably like 10 years ago, at least, if not longer, I felt like this like tension about like, I want to go get my mani-pedi. And I have my daughter. I mean, I have a son too, as I mentioned, but she was really kind of joined and connected with me. And I was kind of torn with spending time with her and taking care of myself and getting my pedicure. And what I decided to do is take her with me. So she would start getting her, kids pedicure or manicure. And that's how I was able to spend time for myself and not compromise time with my daughter. Mm-hmm. And, that has been something we've been doing for years. And I will say we've left salons because they didn't treat my daughter well. If you can't treat my child, we're gone. But in general, I still get them done. And Saturday, my daughter and I went and got our nails done. And it was very nice.
Yeah. Those are amazing times. I wanted to go back to something you mentioned about listening and how important that is. And that's honestly something that I have learned with my kids as they have moved away from the house, because I think part of our problem solving nature is not only that we're mothers, but we're also physicians. Mm-hmm. And so typically within a 15 to 20 minute period, if you were a good physician, usually you're known as being someone that listens, but also before the patient leaves, you've got this, and this for them to do so that you can help them solve their problem. And I think that it's important, for me, it was important to learn that that's not always to the benefit of your kid, because they have to learn to solve their own problems. Yeah. So being there to listen, and I mean, that can go towards, friends, relationships, sometimes it's just more important to be there to listen. And if they ask your opinion and how to solve the problem, but even sometimes if they're looking for you to solve it for them, help maybe guide them to solving it themselves. So good point that you brought up. Just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah.
And if I can piggyback, I'm still learning how to do that in my friendships, because my instinct is I want to help solve, this is a problem, we can fix this together. Whereas now I try and say, I'm listening, or I'm hearing you, and try and take a breath and really listen, as opposed to running down the road of, well, here are the 5 things that you can do about this. Because you both, Lisa and Angela, you're right in that people want to be heard. Mm-hmm. And part of showing up for other people is being present and listening. And that was a really hard lesson for me, I think, to learn, because I was just in the mode of we're gonna make this right and better, and we're gonna move on to the next thing. Whereas let's just be right here and we're gonna sit with this.
I have to add, you are like the number one encourager. I think you're a very good listener, but in the midst of someone being at their down, it's always the light that you show. And that is crucial in having, a good friend, is somebody that can always show you the light when you are always seeing the dark. So, but anyway, back to you, Lisa.
Yes.
About Sylvia, because
I know, right? We can have a whole episode. We'll save that one. It's called Boss
Leap. And today we're with Lisa Burgos Hernandez, MD, MPH.
So, in terms of those young physicians that may be listening, or those young women that think that they want to go into medicine, and I'll just kind of go back to COVID. What did that teach you, I guess, about medicine in general? About our roles as physicians, and not necessarily as a public health officer, but the roles of physicians, all of us, in this, journey called, medicine.
That's a great question. I would say that the pandemic taught me lots of different things, whether it was personally or professionally. But in terms of, as a physician, sometimes I have to go back to basics and kind of learn and remember what you learned in terms of whether it's your chemistry and biology, in this case for the pandemic. And then there's also one thing is that you may not know everything. And we made mistakes and you had to acknowledge it. For example, early on, there was questions about like, do you wear mask? Right.
I remember.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, you don't need to wear a mask.
Right.
We need to preserve the mask for those people that are in hospitals, all the healthcare workers that are in hospitals and acute care or in emergent situations. We can't use masks for everyone. That's just not the way we're going to. And it's not the best way to control this disease. And guess what? We were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that we had to pivot and acknowledge our mistake and then recover from it. And I will say that that's been really hard to do because people remember that we were very adamant about, the utility of mask and whether you needed mask or not. And, I remember that. And that was hard. I remember even having those conversations internally within the city, and people would make masks, and cloth masks were the first things, and they asked me, hey, what do you want to do with these masks that volunteers had made? What are we going to do with them? I said, save them. We're not going to use them yet because it's not the recommendation. I don't know if we really think it's going to be useful for the community. And then I don't know how many weeks later, we're like, yeah, you remember those masks that you were making or the volunteers made? We need to give them out. And I remember my daughter and I making the mask ourselves. And, there's like this picture that of me and this mask that I made using a paper clip for the nose clip. And so people were doing all those things, and we actually used them. So I think that's one of the things I learned in the pandemic is that, that you go back to basics, and also that there are times when you make decisions that were good for then or seem right then, but actually in the long run weren't the right decision. And you have to pivot and then also admit that you made a mistake.
Sorry, Sylvia, but I just have to say, in terms of where we are as a society, it's one of those things where it's almost as if you're respected more if you never admit you're wrong. And
Yeah.
I just, I think it's so important. I mean, what a great topic. That could be a whole nother, segment of, part of being, I think, respected in any area that you work in or practice in, or as just being a human being, as being able to say, I have more information now, and I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Yeah.
I respect that person so much more than the person that is quote unquote strong, because they'll never admit that they've made a mistake.
Yeah. You have to have humility.
Humility.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But we make the best decisions based on the information that we have at the time.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And, I have gone into patients' rooms and said, hey, we have more information now. We're going to move in this direction. Certainly in my personal life, I have said, you know what, I was incorrect. I need to kind of change what I said, and we're going to move forward. And I take responsibility for what has happened, and let's try and evolve because we're all human. And so it's tough.
Very, very much so.
So you are now an empty nester,
Yes.
Lisa. Both of your kids are in college and graduate school. Tell me how that has been for you and your husband.
Oh, it's a process. My son was the first one that left the nest, and I thought, okay, this will be easy. He's independent. I don't spend, I spend time with him, but not the same. And the family went to send them off, and my daughter and husband left before I did, and I stayed like a day longer. And I just remember saying goodbye and feeling like, gosh, this is like heartbreak. I was like, oh my God, I didn't expect that. I'm like, we're not that connected. What am I going to do if my daughter leaves? But, I was thinking, wow, that was a little unexpected and a surprise that when he left and I left him, that I was that I don't know, impacted.
Mhm.
And then 2 years later, my daughter left. And that was, I thought, okay, we are super connected. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time transitioning her and me. And she was ready to go.
Mhm.
And
Was she like, bye, mommy? No.
pretty much, and it was we're still doing, there was still pandemic
Mhm.
restrictions a little bit, but, and she would say, Mom, you can't come into my dorm
Mhm.
because, COVID restrictions. So you can meet me down in the parking lot and I'll pick up the things that you bought for my dorm. And,
Wow.
I was like, oh, okay. So, so that was a little hard, and that was a good thing too, because then she was able to have her time and really, I went to college, right? I went to med school, went to grad school, right? So I had those experiences, whether it was in the dorm or my apartment, and having friends and making new friends and experiencing new things. And I think that's what needed to happen for her. But for me, I was expecting to sort of a little more of a gradual change. And that was fine. It was good that way. And now, she comes home when, and my kids come home for holidays, and, being able to visit them, that's nice. And I know that it's a visit, and then they go back to doing their thing, their classes, and I get to learn about their classes. And sometimes I hear a bit of the gossip of what's going on with my daughter. My son doesn't tell me that much, though. I try to hear things, but for myself, it was learning about what am I going to do with my time, and some of it was spending more time building my career, because that's one thing that happened with my kids, is that I would say that women, their careers are impacted more with whether it's the pregnancy or the recovery. The impact is more on women, I will say, no matter how supportive your partner is. And my husband was very supportive, and that was important. However, it still impacts us more than it does the partner, I would say. So I was able to spend more time developing my interest. It was just outside of the pandemic, so it was a matter of thinking about how, and because I was in public health, how the pandemic impacted the health of the community more. And I will say, the pandemic, I will say, kind of made the world realize the impact of disparities on the communities.
Yes.
But those were already occurring.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
But anyway, back to the empty nesting. I was able to not only refocus on my career, but also develop some of my own interests. And some of it was, dealing with my pandemic puppy and playing with her and spending
Hello,
time.
the Casey.
Yes, to Casey. Yeah, we don't want to call her over though. But anyway, so having that time, and also spending time taking care of myself, doing more, thinking about exercise, and actually baking a little bit more and making new meals. So those were some of the things that I was able to do as an empty nester that I didn't have time to do with the kids, or less time to do that when the kids were in the house 24/7.
I would agree with everything you just said, but I have to harp on the dog, because I was feeling you when you were talking about when your son left, because when my oldest daughter left, every night I would cry. No one would see me crying, but I would cry. But my youngest was still at home. And just so happened when she had graduated, our dog was at 13 and had essentially, we think wandered away and died, but basically kind of ran away. And so anyway, it was a horrible story. I said, I don't want another dog right now. I don't want to have to take care of anything else. I've got enough on my plate, working on call. I don't get his rest anyway, yada, yada, yada. But the youngest was in cahoots with my husband, and they ended up getting a Shih Tzu poodle, Pierre.
Hi, Pierre.
Who is now with my youngest, or it's because it's her dog in San Diego, but he saved my life. So, I mean, and just in terms of taking your mind off, I mean, animals are just amazing vessels of compassion and help you, a lot of times, with grief. They are a lot of work for me anyway. I'm grateful for the animals that I've had in my life. And the other thing that you mentioned is how we because I have kids as well, I think that mom guilt, and it is still very prevalent that we still are, I think, more reluctant as women to take on more responsibilities or higher positions in our career for our kids. And I'm not advocating whether that's right or wrong or trying to make a point whether it's right or wrong. But I do think for the younger physicians coming up, I try to impress that there are alternatives. Like, just make sure you have systems in place if you want to advance that will allow you to do that. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like what you would tell a younger Lisa that maybe already knows, I want to have a career in public health and I'd like to do, this, that, and the other, but I also want a family. Would you tell them anything different than what you've done?
No, I think I remember actually in medical school, I was on a pediatrics rotation. Can't remember the name of the physician, but she was I don't know if she was department head or she was in senior leadership. But I said to her, when is the best time to have kids? And she said, there isn't one. And I was like, what? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And, it's really, you're going to have to figure it out. Like what is a good time for you? And I think having supports, going back to having supports, whether it's with a partner or with your family, quite honestly, that helped us as a 2-physician family thrive, or at least survive, sometimes thrive. But, really was having family, whether it was my parents or my husband's parents. I mean, they really helped raise the kids. And if it wasn't for them, I don't know how we would have done it. I remember with both kids, I had preterm labor and complications. And I remember with my daughter, when I was told, okay, you're going to have to be admitted during my pregnancy, I didn't call my husband first. Shh, don't tell him. I called my in-laws. And I said, I'm going to need your help because, I had a almost 2-year-old at the time. And I knew that we weren't going to be able to do it without them. So really calling them to help out was one of the things. So really having as much as you can, having a plan, having your supports available really is something that I would say, whether it's for family or whatever you're doing, but really having that. Though I will say during my pregnancy, especially my second, I had a plan. I actually even talked to the anesthesiologist and told them, hey, I'm hospitalized. I'm such and such weeks pregnant. I want to talk about my anesthesia options. If I have a C-section, I don't want, general anesthesia, not good. I know you know that. So I had this whole plan. Well, my daughter, I delivered in the emergency room. And my husband delivered the baby. We called labor and delivery and told them to meet us down in the emergency room. But, he was the physician there. Because of that,
Wasn't there a hurricane though, Lisa?
Yeah, Hurricane Isabel.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
And that's when I learned that only certain exits were cleared, like there was a priority for Public Works or whoever was doing, the clearing of the freeways, highways, and the exits, that the exits to hospitals were cleared first because of that priority. And thank God, because it was in the midst of a hurricane. Yeah. Hurricane Isabel.
The point is you can have the best plan,
You
but
could have the best plan, and guess what? It may not work out that way. However, it is good. It is good to know your options, and that's part of the planning is having a plan A through potential C or D.
Yes, agreed. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, you were talking a lot about kind of community and networks, and certainly we need them professionally as well as personally. So I'm happy that you brought that up for our listeners, and it is such a reminder for all of us. I know that during the pandemic, my father was sick, and both of you were really helpful. And Lisa, you came to support me during my dad's transition. And that definitely meant the world to me. And if I hadn't had that community, I just don't know I don't know what I would have done. And so that's really very, very important. And I just wanted to kind of thank you for that.
Of course. And by the way, I have a question for you. You don't have the answer, but are you coming for Christmas? My daughter asked that. She said, is Sylvia coming for Christmas? I said, I don't know. I have to ask.
I am working. So thank you, Alina. I'm working 23 to 27. We can have an offline conversation about my work schedule. Please feel free to send a doctor's note to my leadership.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering. And I'm sorry that it wasn't the answer that we all wanted.
Me too.
Well, just so you know, if we're here doing Christmas here, Sylvia, you've got a seat and a plate.
Okay. Thank you. See, well, it works out. But Lisa, we talked earlier about your mani-pedi as part of your self-care regime. Are there any other things you do for self-care?
Besides sleeping?
Hey, sleep is important.
Sleep is very important.
Well, I'm a shopper, so that's another thing. And then also we talked a little bit earlier about exercise. I think that's really important. I am not an exerciser. I really don't find joy in exercising. So I have to motivate myself. And some of that is the fact that I'm looking right at my Peloton over there, which I didn't think. My husband bought it, and I'm like, that is just a waste of time. And then I got on it. And, so that's something that I challenge myself, and I want to make sure that I'm on a streak. So that's important to do, is really to be able to exercise and to sleep. Those are really important things for self-care that I do try to keep to a schedule for, so that it actually happens. And then also just the little things like shopping. Nordstrom and me, we have a strong friendship.
So that's why you guys are so close.
Yeah.
Exactly. Lisa, do you have a favorite Peloton class or instructor?
Sometimes I like Allie Love.
Love Allie. Love her.
And I also, and I'm going to mispronounce her last name, but I like Hannah Frankinson. She's from England. She's based in London, and she's funny too. I like her, but I like Allie as well. So I usually go between the two. My husband likes more hardcore people. I'm just not that. I like the positive.
Yeah.
She pushes you. I mean, you're going to get a good workout, but it's not the same as like some of the other folks that are just like super duper intense. So those are my favorite ones, I would say. And then now you could watch a movie, or Netflix on there as well. So sometimes if I want to,
interesting.
Yeah. So they changed it up. So if you don't want to do a ride with your, favorite instructor, you could also catch up on your favorite Netflix or YouTube show or whatever you stream on YouTube. So that's an option as well. So they've kind of.
Is that a premium subscription, or is that with the regular subscription?
I think it's regular.
Interesting. You could
even use Prime, your Amazon Prime and some other things. So they kind of varied. So that I think that's because I know, but
Mhm.
it's a great business model, I would say.
Absolutely.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Very cool. Very cool.
So, Lisa Burgos Hernandez, you have given our listeners lots of gems to really take home today. I'm thinking about using white coats to advocate for our communities, the importance of having a network, having empathy, and going back to basics when I think about listening and showing up for people. We want to thank you for sharing your journey and really being candid with our listeners and with Angela and I. And we wish you well. And thank you very much for listening.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you for really for your role and those across the country in holding it down during the pandemic, because on the front lines, everybody was in the journey together. But knowing that you had the country's and your community's best interests at heart, is I think what we all have to remember. And so I know your heart, and I certainly know what your role was, and grateful that you were here, and so good to catch up with you. And my takeaways were the importance of listening, and not always necessarily solving someone's problems, but being the listener, and practicing humility in all of our relationships. So I can't wait to stay in contact with you, and appreciate all that you had to share. Is there anything that we didn't ask that you wanted to share with our audience before we say goodbye?
Not really. I mean, I would say that no matter what for the folks that are, the young women especially that are listening, is that you can do it. That was something that I didn't talk about, that with my family, my mom, she showed by example. And even though she wasn't in the healthcare field, she would expose me to things that kind of subtly kind of supported that goal, and said, hey, you can do this. Like even when I was working with her in a summer, and she was working in admin in a hospital, we would sit in the cafeteria and I would hear the doctors talking. And I was like, wow, they're just normal people like you and me. And I think that was really important, is knowing that we're all human, as you mentioned, Angela, and that you can continue. Don't let whether it's your self-doubt or doubt from other people dissuade you from your goal. And I think that's really important, is that you can do it. You might have to work a little harder, or it might take you a little longer, or maybe not, but you should continue on your path, and your networks will support you in what you're doing, and not to give up. That's one of the things I would say, is to keep on going and not to give up.
Beautiful. Love
going.
ending on that.
Yes. And
Beautiful.
Not to give up.
Not give up. You can do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa Burgos Hernandez.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. And to our audience, until next time, be well.
May you be well.
That's a wrap on another episode of Boss Leap. May this conversation enlighten your path toward personal growth and professional empowerment. For more thought-provoking and eye-opening discussions like this one, head to our website at bossleappodcast.com. Always remember to celebrate your wins and trust yourself. A positive mindset can push you out of your comfort zone and into far greater heights. Until next time, may you be well.
Before we go, there's one more thing the lawyers have asked us to include. It's the legal language, and you know how doctors love lawyers. This podcast is presented only for educational and entertainment purposes. Although we are doctors, on this show, we are just your friends. This podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of your physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professionals. Understood? Awesome. We'll see you in the next episode.